The marble floors of the mansion gleamed under the cold light of crystal chandeliers, their shine reflecting a household built on wealth but stripped of warmth. The silence inside was heavy, interrupted only by the sharp echo of a man's voice. "You're fired," billionaire Alexander Hayes said flatly, his eyes narrowing at the trembling maid standing before him. His voice was the kind that sliced through air like a blade, not raised, but so sharp that it carried finality. Maria, the maid, clutched the small apron tied around her waist as though it could shield her from the humiliation dripping off his words. Her chest rose and fell quickly, not from defiance, but from desperation. She needed this job. She needed the wages to pay for her daughter's medicine, to keep food on the table, but the billionaire didn't know or didn't care. Her lips parted, trembling. "Sir, please, if I could just explain." "You've already done enough." Alexander cut her off. His voice reverberated through the vast hall with its gilded walls and polished banisters. "Pack your things. Security will escort you out." The world felt as if it collapsed in Maria's chest. She turned, blinking rapidly to hold back the tears threatening to spill. The boy she had spent nearly every day with for the past year, Alexander's only son, sat quietly in the corner. Little Ethan, 6 years old, with eyes wide as the sky, yet locked in his own world, his autistic world. He never spoke, never made eye contact for long, never responded to anyone but in subtle glances. Maria knelt before him, forcing a smile through her cracking voice. "Goodbye, Ethan," she whispered softly. "Be good, my sweet boy." She brushed a hand lightly against his cheek. For a brief second, something flickered in his eyes, something Maria had prayed for night after night. She stood, forcing herself toward the door. Her steps echoed in the cavernous silence, each one heavier than the last. And then a small, broken sound pierced the air. It was quiet at first, like the rustle of a leaf in autumn. Maria froze mid-step. Alexander's head jerked toward his son. "Ma," the word was shaky, imperfect, as though dragged out of Ethan's chest with every ounce of effort he had, but it was unmistakable. His first word. Maria spun around, her heart racing. Tears blurred her vision. Ethan was staring straight at her, his lips trembling as he tried again. "Ma." Alexander's face drained of color. For 6 years, countless therapists, endless attempts. Not once had his son spoken a single word, and now, the first sound he made, the first connection he bridged to the world was for her, for the maid he had just cast out. Maria pressed her hands to her mouth, unable to stop the sob that escaped. Ethan's little hand reached out, fingers stretching toward her retreating figure, as if the fragile thread of his new voice could tether her back. Alexander stood frozen, the weight of his own decision crashing down on him like a tidal wave. For a man who had built empires, crushed rivals, and commanded boardrooms with the coldness of steel, this moment unraveled something deep within him. His son had spoken, and the word was not dad. It was not papa. It was ma, and it was for the woman he had just fired. The silence that followed was deafening. Only the boy's breathless attempt to repeat it again filled the room. "Ma." The billionaire felt his throat tighten in a way he hadn't known since he was a boy himself. For the first time in years, he didn't know what to do. Mourning at the Hayes estate did not so much begin as unfurl silk curtains, breathing with ocean wind, motorized shades rising in practiced silence, a procession of discreet black cars purring to life along a half-moon driveway, The house was all limestone and glass, a cliffside prism catching the first light. Money had been layered over it like a second skin. Within, the air held a cool, polished calm, and the scent of lilies and lemon oil traveled the corridors as if the perfume of order itself. Alexander Hayes moved through that world like winter in a tailored suit, tall, clean-cut, exact in every gesture. He kept his grief in order the way he kept his portfolio contained, diversified, never discussed. The tabloids called him cold. Those few, close enough to know better, called him tired. He was a widower at 38, the heir who turned a shipping dynasty into a global tech and logistics machine. He didn't attend board meetings, he choreographed them. He signed hospital wings with the same precision he signed mergers, each donation immaculate and public, as if generosity could be engineered into a system and sadness could be audited out of a life. Yet the quiet inside the mansion was not peace. It was a practiced hush. Staff spoke in low tones that skimmed the surface of rooms. Meals arrived as sculptures no one touched, and doors closed with expensive softness. Alexander lived among these symphonies of management and control, and still, he carried a private noise, the relentless tick of questions he couldn't solve with money or speed. Ethan was the bright, quiet center of that noise. 6 years old, light brown hair always a little mussed, eyes that drifted to the edges of a room as if constellations lived there. He was a boy for whom the world sometimes arrived too loud, too bright, too sudden. Therapists described his autism with careful words and hopeful timelines. They spoke tactfully of routines and sensory regulation and bridges to language. Alexander, who measured life in outcomes, learned to memorize the vocabulary low stimulus, predictable transitions, joint attention without yet knowing how to be a father inside those terms. He had built companies to navigate storms. He could not yet read the weather of his son. Maria could. She had learned Ethan's weather by heart. Not in textbooks, but in tiny luminous patterns, how his shoulders softened when the dishwasher hummed, how he liked his blueberries cold and counted them in pairs, the half-second warning before his hands flew to his ears if a pot clanged, how a soft, steady hum from her, almost a lullaby without words, turned a gathering cloud in him into passing mist. She moved around him like a lighthouse, steady, kind, mostly unseen, except by Ethan, who went where she gently pointed. She did not talk about her own life unless asked. When she smiled, it felt like a borrowed sunbeam she shared without keeping any for herself. Her world beyond the mansion was small and work-bruised, in a third-floor walk-up that held heat in summer and drafts in winter. A second-hand crib sat under a window that rattled in the coastal wind. An oscillating fan clicked every sixth swing because no one had time to fix it. A paper calendar on the wall bloomed with shift times and bus routes. The center of it all, 2 newborn girls, twins, breathing in unison like a single sweet engine, hand-me-down onesies, mismatched socks, formula measured with the precision of prayer. These were the artifacts of Maria's evenings. She named them Alma and June. Alma, after her grandmother, whose hands were always warm. June. For a month, she hoped they would someday love, because it rhymed with sun and sounded like doors opening. The twins had arrived early, but stubborn. Tiny fingers forever unfurling, hearts that beat against her collarbone with the fierce insistence of life. Formula was expensive. Diapers were a tax on hope. Every hour Maria spent in Alexander's house bought her babies a day of breathing easy. Every hour she missed with her twins cost her a story she would have told them later of first smiles, of midnight snuffles, of the quiet drum of rain on the window and the way their breathing matched it. The contrast between their worlds was not theatrical, it was practical. At the estate, glassware sang at the lightest tap. In Maria's apartment, cups bore hairline cracks held together by careful hands. The mansion's laundry room had machines that whispered. Her building's basement washer rattled like an old train that refused to retire. In Alexander's office, the screens were the size of windows. In Maria's living room, the window was the screen, the city's sirens and gulls and distant laughter moving across it like headlines. The billionaire's mornings were scheduled with precision. Maria's mornings were a series of negotiations with buses, with naps, with the price of milk. And yet, for a year, a thread had tied those places together, Ethan. In the mansion, he patted after Maria, socks silent on marble, fingers trailing along textures she taught him to name: cool banister, rough basket, smooth stone, soft throw. On her phone, tucked between pictures of Alma and June and a grocery list, lived a tiny gallery of Ethan's victories. His hand curled around a crayon, his face calm under the sunrise lamp, his eyes lifting to meet hers for 3 steady seconds while he pressed a toy car into her palm. A quiet offering, she didn't record the hard moments. She recorded what turned hard into possible. The afternoon before everything shattered, Alexander signed a deal so large the markets rang like a bell. Reporters camped beyond the hedges. A board member sent champagne that cooled in perfect symmetry on the marble counter. In the nursery, Ethan stacked wooden blocks slowly, carefully, as if building a word he could live inside. Maria, humming low, fed him yogurt and counted breaths between spoonfuls so he wouldn't feel rushed. When Alexander paused in the doorway, he watched with a stillness that looked like disinterest from far away and like grief up close. "Good work today," he said finally, because gratitude felt safer than tenderness. Maria nodded, then checked the baby monitor feed on her phone. 2 swaddled forms in the glow of a borrowed nightlight. "Ethan likes the blue blocks best," she offered, a small bridge. Alexander's eyes flicked to the tower. "I can buy 1,000 of them," he said, and realized too late it sounded like money trying to be a father. "1 set is enough if it's loved, sir." Maria answered softly. That evening, the estate performed its ritual. Staff became shadows. Courses arrived like art and cooled untouched. Doors sighed shut as if protecting a museum after hours. A therapy schedule lay open on a desk. Speech on Tuesday. Occupational therapy, Thursday. Sensory play, daily. Alexander skimmed it, then closed the tablet on a headline, speculating about his next acquisition. He walked to Ethan's room, where a nightlight painted a soft halo on the wall. Ethan was awake, tracing with his eyes the leaf shadow of a ficus swaying in the air conditioning. On the floor, Maria sat cross-legged, humming something without words. The melody was small and brave. Alexander stood long enough for the music to find a seam in his armor. Then he cleared his throat. Maria rose, smoothing her apron, unaware that tomorrow's storm had already chosen its path. Maria's kitchen told a different story that night. 2 bottles prepped and lined like tiny torches. A sticky note that read diaper cream. A quick pencil sketch, 2 stick-figure girls beneath a sun as fat as a coin. Her neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, tapped each twin's nose whenever she could stop by. "Tres hermosas," she'd whisper, "beautiful, beautiful, beautiful," then add in English, "and their mama, the bravest." Maria would laugh and change the subject to bus routes and prices because praise made the room feel too small. If Alexander was winter, Maria was late spring in a borrowed coat, a season trying its best in a world that couldn't decide to be kind. Their intersection was a child whose needs did not care about money or lack of it. He needed structure. He needed gentleness. He needed a person who could translate chaos into rhythm and light. Maria had become that person. She asked for nothing extra, only enough to catch the last bus, to pay for formula, to press her cheek to each tiny forehead and listen for that even, blessed breathing. Just before dawn, before the word that would harden the morning, Alexander practiced a line for a shareholder call, each syllable smooth as glass. Down the hall, Ethan lined toy cars on a runner rug, red after red, blue after blue. In the kitchen, Maria reheated oatmeal and cut strawberries into careful hearts, because sometimes shapes made food gentler. She thought about rent, about Alma's cough easing, about the squeak in the stroller wheel she kept forgetting to oil. Outside, a gull carved lazy circles over the water. Inside, a note lay folded on the counter. Maria's neat handwriting listing meals Ethan ate without protest. A game he loved for rainy days. A reminder to dim the lights before a thunderstorm. Wealth and poverty are often pictured as different planets. In truth, they are two rooms in the same house, separated by a door everyone pretends is locked. On one side, a man perfected his margins. On the other, a woman perfected a morning for a boy who measured the world in quiet seconds. Somewhere between them lay a note no one had read yet and a voice no one had heard. By noon, the door between those rooms would swing on its hinges. We already know the word that pushed it. What we do not yet know is how a single fragile syllable, Ma would pull it open and flood both rooms with a new kind of light. The storm did not arrive with thunder. It arrived in whispers, misheard conversations, small missteps magnified by exhaustion, and the unyielding chill of a man who had taught himself never to bend. It began with a broken vase, a priceless heirloom, imported from a Venetian palace, perched too close to the edge of the living room table. Ethan, drawn by its swirl of colors, reached out with trembling hands. Maria was across the room, folding laundry. She saw him just as his elbow nudged the pedestal. The crash was sharp, violent, and final. Porcelain scattered like snow across the marble floor. Ethan clutched his ears, rocking as the sound reverberated in his chest. Maria rushed to him, kneeling, her voice soft as she rubbed his back. "It's okay, sweetheart. You're safe. Just noise, just noise." Alexander entered on the sound of shattering. His eyes swept the scene, fragments of a family treasure, his son trembling, the maid's hands on the boy's shoulders. Something in his face turned to ice. What happened? His tone carried no warmth, only demand. Maria opened her mouth. It was an accident. Your negligence. Alexander cut her off. His hand tightened around the phone he carried, knuckles whitening. That vase was irreplaceable. You're here to protect him, not let him destroy what's left of this house. Maria flinched, though not from his volume. He hadn't raised his voice. The weight came from something else, contempt. He didn't mean to. He was just curious. "Please don't." "Enough," Alexander said, as if her defense were an insult. "I've tolerated your excuses long enough. Pack your things. You're finished here." Ethan whimpered, his rocking faster now. Maria's arms wrapped around him instinctively. "Sir, please, he needs consistency. If you remove me suddenly, you presume to tell me how to raise my own son. Alexander's words sliced clean. Leave tonight. The conversation spread through the mansion like spilled ink. Staff members glanced nervously at Maria as she folded her apron one last time. Whispers of sympathy floated, but no one dared intervene. That night, Maria sat on the bus ride home with her twins asleep against her chest, tears slipping silently into their blankets. Every mile away from the mansion widened the gulf between her and the boy who had just begun to trust her. She whispered to her daughters, as though promising them, "We'll find a way. Mama always does." Meanwhile, inside the vast mansion, Alexander poured a glass of whiskey he did not touch. He sat in Ethan's nursery doorway, watching his son press cars into neat lines. Silent but restless, there was no humming lullaby tonight, no gentle rhythm of Maria's voice to stitch she order back into the boy's world. Ethan's breathing grew ragged. He whimpered. His cars fell into disarray, and frustration overtook him. Alexander, frozen, tried, "It's fine, Ethan. Daddy's here," but the words were stiff, foreign on his tongue. His son did not turn, did not calm, did not hear him the way he always seemed to hear her. The night stretched taut. Shadows spilled long across the nursery walls. Alexander's wealth meant nothing against the sound of his son's muffled cries, or the way those cries echoed through the caverns of a house too large for one man and one broken boy. The following morning, Alexander met with a therapist. She leaned her elbows on her notebook, speaking carefully. Consistency is crucial. For Ethan, losing Maria suddenly, it's not just about attachment. It's about stability, familiar voices, familiar hands. Removing her could set him back months. Alexander's jaw tightened. She was careless. He needs discipline, not sentiment. The therapist held his gaze gently. Children like Ethan need both. Without trust, therapy cannot work. You can't replace trust with toys or tutors. It doesn't scale. But Alexander dismissed her, burying himself in meetings, mergers, and phone calls, anything but silence. And yet, silence waited. That evening, as he signed documents under the sterile light of his office, a sound shattered the stillness. Small, tentative, fragile but real. "Ma." His pen slipped. Ink blotted across the page. He lifted his head slowly. Ethan stood in the doorway, lips trembling, eyes wide. "Monsieur," the boy said again, voice cracking. He reached out a hand, not toward Alexander, but toward the empty air where Maria used to stand. It was not only the boy's first word, it was an indictment, a plea, a mirror. For the first time in years, Alexander Hayes, man of a control, titan of glass towers and steel contracts, felt powerless. His son had spoken, but not for him. The word had gone to the maid he had cast aside, and deep within, shame stirred like an old wound reopened. The billionaire had all the power in the world, but he had just learned there are things money cannot command the voice of a child, and the bond he had severed with his own coldness. The next morning broke sharp and brittle, like glass struck too hard. Alexander woke to a house that was quieter than usual, though not in peace, more in absence. Ethan refused breakfast, pushing away the plate with a frustrated cry. The nanny, who had filled in for Maria, couldn't coax him with pancakes or fruit slices cut into stars. His face flushed. His eyes darted toward the door, as though waiting for a ghost to appear. By noon, Ethan had shut down completely. No words, no glances, only the rhythm of his rocking. Alexander, usually armored with work, felt that armor crack. His phone buzzed with executives needing answers, but his attention lingered only on the sight of his boy retreating deeper into silence. When he finally retreated to his study, a manila envelope waited on his desk, delivered anonymously. Inside was not business reports or contracts, but photographs. Maria, blurry and tired, cradling two infants in a cracked apartment, lit by a single bare bulb. Her smile was weary but fierce as she kissed their tiny foreheads. Another image showed formula cans, stacked like treasure, receipts circled with red ink. The note beneath was scrawled in an unfamiliar hand. She cared for your son. While her own daughters went hungry, Alexander's pulse thundered. He had never asked where Maria went when she left his mansion. Never wondered how a woman who worked dawn to dusk managed her own family. He stared at the photos until his chest tightened in something perilously close to guilt. That evening, as he tried to distract Ethan with a new train set, the boy only whispered again, quieter. But clear, Ma. His small fingers touched the floor, tracing invisible patterns. It was not just a word. It was longing. Alexander dismissed the staff, poured himself another untouched drink, and found his driver. Take me to the address on these photos, he ordered, voice clipped, though his hands shook. The drive wound through the streets he had never noticed, rows of tenements, children playing with dented cans, laundry flapping like tired flags. The car pulled up before a building with peeling paint and cracked stairs. For the first time in decades, Alexander hesitated before stepping out. Through a narrow window, he glimpsed Maria. She was rocking two babies, one on each arm, humming the same soft tune she used to calm Ethan. Her face looked worn, but lit with devotion. And then, unexpectedly, Ethan's little cars were there, neatly lined up on her kitchen counter. She hadn't left them behind. She had taken them with her. Alexander's breath caught. He realized then she had carried not only Ethan's routines, but a piece of his world into her own. He returned to his mansion without knocking, but that night his sleep fractured. Dreams twisted with the sound of Ethan's voice calling for Maria, and a memory he had long buried surfaced: his late wife, pale in her final days, whispering, "Promise me you'll find someone who sees him, not his diagnosis, not his inheritance, him." He woke drenched in sweat. He had failed her. He had failed his son. 2 days later, the second twist arrived. A board member confronted him with news his empire was under investigation, funds mismanaged by a partner, headlines brewing about Hayes neglecting oversight. For the first time, his grip on power faltered. The newspapers that once celebrated him sharpened their knives. And in that same breath of crisis, Ethan fell ill, a sudden fever, his small body shivering beneath too many blankets, eyes glassy. The pediatrician warned that stress and disruption could worsen his condition. He needs stability, familiarity. The word rang like a judgment. Alexander sat by his son's bed, torn between the collapse of his empire and the fragility of his boy. For hours, Ethan tossed, whispering in fever dreams, one word only, Ma. It was the final blow. Alexander, billionaire, titan, master of control, realized he could not do this alone. In the darkness of that night, he made a decision that would shock his staff, his board, and perhaps even himself. He would find Maria, not as an employer seeking an employee, but as a father begging for help. What he did not know, what would become the third and deepest twist, was that Maria carried a secret she had never spoken. The reason Ethan calmed in her arms was not only kindness, it was blood. Ethan was not only the boy she cared for. He was her late sister's son, the night Maria's secret unraveled. The mansion was alive with tension. The fever had dragged Ethan into a restless haze. His cheeks flushed, his small fists curling around his blanket. Alexander sat helpless at his son's bedside, watching monitors beep and doctors whisper. None of it mattered. The boy's lips still formed the same trembling syllable, "Ma," over and over again. And then the door creaked open. Maria stepped inside, cradling her twins against her chest, her eyes luminous with both fear and determination. She had not come to plead for her job. She had come because Ethan needed her. The boy's eyes fluttered, glazed with fever. And then, when they found her cleared, if only for a heartbeat. "Ma," he whispered, and his lips twitched into the faintest of smiles. Alexander's throat closed. He had summoned her in desperation, but what came next he hadn't anticipated. Maria bent to the boy, her song the same quiet lullaby she had hummed in kitchens and nurseries, filling the sterile air. Slowly, miraculously, Ethan's breathing evened. His body stopped trembling. His hand, small and fragile, sought hers, and Alexander saw something he had been blind to. The way Ethan reached for Maria was not just comfort, it was recognition. Later, when the fever had settled into restless sleep, Alexander followed her into the dim corridor. "Tell me the truth," he demanded, though his voice broke in the middle. "Why him? Why does he—" He could not finish. Maria stood tall, though exhaustion lined her face. "Because he is my sister's son." The words landed like thunder. She explained her sister, Isabella, had fallen in love with Alexander's younger brother, a man long gone, lost to a reckless accident. Their child, Ethan, had been taken into Alexander's care after tragedy struck. But Isabella had begged Maria, with her final breath, to watch over him, and so Maram had entered his house, not as a stranger, but as family hidden in plain sight. Alexander staggered back, the weight of it crushing him. He had fired her with contempt. He had stripped Ethan of the one person who carried his mother's blood, his songs, his memory. He had betrayed his late wife's wish and his brother's son's needs in a single blind stroke. The billionaire, always unshaken, broke. He pressed his palms against the wall, his voice cracking like glass. "What have I done?" But the storm had not yet peaked. Hours later, the scandal broke across every screen. Headlines of fraud and betrayal within his company. Photos of Alexander's stern face splashed beside words like reckless and negligent. Investors pulled, partners turned cold, and suddenly the empire built on iron discipline trembled like sand. The board demanded his resignation, his fortune bled by the hour, and through it all, Ethan's fever rose again. In the chaos, the house nearly collapsed under fear, staff resigning, phones ringing with creditors, reporters swarming the gates. But in the center of it, Maria remained. She stayed at Ethan's bedside, humming, whispering, her twins tucked nearby in borrowed bassinets. The mansion, once cold marble, was filled with cries, lullabies, prayers. Then came the moment of shattering climax. Ethan's breathing faltered in the night. The machines shrieked. A nurse shouted for help. Alexander, rushing forward, froze at the sight of his son convulsing. The billionaire's world, all the towers, contracts, wealth meant nothing against that fragile body fighting for air. He sank to his knees beside the bed. "Please, Ethan, please. Daddy's here. I love you. I love you." But Ethan's eyes were not on him. They searched the room, wide and terrified, until they found Maria. Her hand reached his, steady as stone, and she whispered, "I'm here. You're safe." And for the first time, Ethan spoke more than one word. His tiny voice cracked, but the syllables were clear. Love you, Ma. The room fell silent. The machines beeped steady again. His fever began to break. Alexander collapsed into the chair, tears flooding his face, unashamed. He had seen boardrooms fall, fortunes vanish, but nothing had undone him like the sound of his son's fragile words. Maria held the boy, her own tears dripping into his hair. She knew then that her secret no longer mattered. Truth had found its way through the child himself, and Alexander, broken open, whispered the words no one had ever expected to leave his lips: stay. Not as staff, as family. The climax had arrived. A billionaire on his knees, a maid revealed as kin, a child who spoke his heart for the first time. The empire outside crumbled, but inside that room, a new one was being built, one made not of glass and steel, but of fragile, unbreakable love. The sun crept into the mansion slowly, casting long golden ribbons through tall windows that once seemed like barriers but now looked like invitations. The house that had always felt cold and cavernous carried a new sound, small coos from Maria's twin girls, gentle laughter from Ethan as he tapped blocks into uneven towers, and, above all, the quiet relief of a family rediscovering itself. Alexander had not slept, but he looked different. His suit jacket hung unused across a chair. His sleeves were rolled back. His eyes were rimmed red, but not from anger or late-night meetings. It was the raw evidence of tears shed without shame. The empire outside his walls was still burning. Reporters crowded the gates. Headlines screamed betrayal, downfall, collapse. His phone buzzed relentlessly with demands for answers, board members clawing for control. Yet Alexander no longer rushed to his office or dictated orders with clipped precision. He sat on the nursery floor beside Maria, watching Ethan place a block carefully on top of another, wobbling, then steady. It wasn't the world's collapse that mattered. It was this, his son, calmer than he had been in months, resting his head against Maria's shoulder while Alma and June gurgled in their bassinet. For the first time, Alexander whispered words not for shareholders or lawyers, but for Maria. I was wrong about everything. Maria looked at him, her eyes tired yet luminous. You were afraid to be vulnerable, afraid to lose control. He swallowed hard, and in that fear, I almost lost him. His eyes flicked to Ethan, who hummed softly as if echoing Maria's lullaby. But you gave him something I couldn't. You gave him yourself. Maria shook her head gently. I only gave him love, the kind anyone should. The billionaire's voice cracked. Then teach me. It was not an order, not a command. It was a plea. The following days brought chaos. Investigations deepened. Luxury cars were repossessed, assets frozen. Alexander's name dragged through the mud. But while the world feasted on the image of a fallen titan, another story was being written behind the mansion's gates. Reporters captured glimpses of something startling: Alexander Hayes carrying two babies on his arms down to the garden, Maria walking beside him, and little Ethan, once so hidden in his silence, laughing at the sight of soap bubbles carried by the wind. Those photos went viral, but not for scandal. They told a different narrative: redemption, humanity. At night, Alexander still fought his battles. He signed papers of surrender to the board, watched pieces of his empire slip from his hands. And yet, when he returned to the nursery and saw Ethan asleep between Alma and June, his tiny hand clutching Maria's, the loss didn't feel like defeat. It felt like liberation. One evening, as the last of his company was stripped away, he stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean. Maria joined him, the twins cradled against her. Everything I built, he murmured, staring at the waves. Gone. Maria tilted her head toward the nursery where Ethan slept. Not everything. He turned, eyes catching hers. You mean him? I mean family, she corrected softly. In that moment, Alexander realized something that shook him more than any scandal ever could. His fortune had always been a cage, his house a museum, his success a hollow tower. But here, in the laughter of children, in Maria's steady strength, in the fragile courage of his son's first words, he had found something untouchable. Weeks later, the board formally removed him. His name vanished from the headlines, replaced by fresher scandals, but in the quiet of the once cold mansion, the halls no longer echoed with emptiness. They rang with tiny footsteps, squeals, lullabies, and the tender murmur of bedtime stories. One night, Ethan, sleepy-eyed, curled against Alexander's chest and whispered clearer than ever before, "Daddy." The word broke Alexander open. Not in shame this time, but in gratitude. He pressed his lips to his son's hair, tears spilling freely. "I'm here. Ethan, I'm not going anywhere." Maria, standing in the doorway, smiled faintly. Her twins stirred, and she rocked them gently, humming the lullaby that had become the heartbeat of this home. The billionaire, who once measured his worth in numbers, now measured it in moments: a son's laugh, a baby's coo, the warmth of a woman's hand reaching for his. The mansion was no longer a monument to wealth. It was a home. And though the world outside still remembered Alexander Hayes as a fallen empire builder, those within his walls knew the truth. He had finally built something greater than fortune. He had built a family,